So I guess there's a theme going on today. So, when I was a little girl,
Simmy, I think you have to do it because there's some people.
what's that?
Oh, you have to use this.
Okay, well, I'm sometimes going to need two hands, but it
Okay,
doesn't
here,
matter.
here, I'll hold it.
You're going to get tired.
Ah, I got nothing else to do.
Okay, so when I was a little girl, my father used to tell the most wonderful stories. He would drive up in his open truck up onto the driveway, and he'd open the door. Hi, Annie, I'm home. And then he would come outside on a warm summer night, sit on a lawn chair on the porch, and the kids would gather around from the neighborhood, and he would tell us stories. And sometimes they were silly, and sometimes they were sad, and sometimes they were spooky around Halloween time. And he was just bigger than life when he told a story. And I guess the stories that I loved the most were stories that my dad would start with Tanz upon a wine. Because when Dad would start a story with Tanz upon a wine, we knew it was a story that would stick like glue. Well, I have a story, and of course there's no better way to start it than with Tanz upon a wine. There was a little building tucked in at Danport, DuPont and Bathurst. Just sort of when you come up under the hill, just by the railroad tracks, there was a little building. And it was a sign shop called Banner Signs. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And I would say just about every sign in the city, whether it was Mo Panzer's or Katz's Deli, they all came out of that little sign shop. It was Banner Signs. And it was owned by a man named Jack Sadoff. And I know it well, because Jack Sadoff was my father. And there was nothing greater in my life as a little girl than to go and visit my dad at work, at the shop. He had a drafting table that went from one end of the shop to the other, this huge drafting table. And he would unroll these rolls of mural paper. And there were cans and bottles and jars of paint and paintbrushes everywhere. And I would watch my dad with the precision of a surgeon as he would paint these signs. And I would watch every letter. He could make a perfect circle with a flick of a wrist, just like that. And I was in awe of my dad. And he was also a musician. He played the organ and the piano. And I would say, if the lights were on at night, everyone knew they could come to my house and there'd be a concert. My dad would give them a concert. I always included, I Left My Heart in San Francisco was his favorite song. Or he would have a sing-song that always included the Teddy Bear's Picnic, because that was my favorite song. And he would play, and my mother would say, "Oh, Jack, enough already," and he would just play. But the best part of my dad was the stories that he told. And of course, the ones that started with Tanz upon a wine. And he would tuck us into bed at night, and we would say, "Oh, Daddy, tell us a story. Daddy, tell us a story." That's all I had to say. And in my vocabulary, "Daddy, tell us a story" wasn't a sentence. It was a word. It was a word that I would throw out at any moment. "Daddy, tell me a story." And within seconds, as quick as a sneeze, I always say, he would tell us a story. And my mother would say, Jack, let the kids go to sleep." And we'd giggle and laugh and go, "Daddy, tell us another one." And he would. Well, I guess about 25 years ago, my dad took ill. He was very, very sick. He was we were working on finding the balance between heart failure and kidney failure. Well, pick your death. My dad died of heart failure. And I was really blessed because I was there when he passed away. In fact, I was holding his little head in my arms. And the last words he heard was, "Daddy, you're the best." And he closed his eyes and he took his last breath and he died. And now here's where the story really begins. Because when he died, all I wanted from my father was a sign. And I waited and begged and waited and begged. And a friend of mine said to me, "You know what, Simmy? Your father will come to you in a dream. That will be your sign. And sure enough, a few days later, I had a dream. And I dreamed that I was carrying my father's laundry, and I could smell the paint and the turpentine and the linseed oil. And I remember holding his laundry, and I was sobbing, and I woke up to tears in my pillow. And I thought, oh my God, that was the sign from my father. And so that night, a friend of mine came over. Her name was Adele, and we were having dinner. And I told her about the dream. And as I told her about the dream, as true as I'm standing here, the light above the kitchen table went out and turned back on. And I went, oh my God, Adele, that's my father. That was my father. And then she went downstairs to watch some TV. I went and washed the dishes. And the light above the sink went off and turned on again. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't, till this day, it just makes my heart flutter. I get goosebumps. Well, later that night, my husband came home from his gig, and I told him about the dream. And I told him about the light above the kitchen table, and I told him about the light over the sink. And just as I was talking, the television went off and turned on again. Mark said, why did you turn off the TV? I said, Mark, I didn't. Well, a few weeks later, I was at El Fornello on Queen Street, little Italian restaurant. And when I was paying the bill, now this is going back a number of years, but I was paying the bill, and all of a sudden, a pebble, and I'm not kidding, a pebble hit me on the forehead and landed on the bill. And I realized I had already made a mistake on the bill. I would have left a $60 tip. And I looked, and there was the pebble that had hit me on the head, and I thought, that was my father saying, idiot, look at the bill, you made a mistake. Well, it got to the point where it was almost like I could ask for a response, and it would happen. Now, I know this sounds completely bizarre, and I'm pretty smart lady, and I'm pretty educated, and the brain of me, like my husband would say, it's bad wiring. It's a bad light bulb. But the heart inside me thinks that maybe it was my dad's last pitch at answering the call. Daddy, give me a story. And I think he just did.
Simmy, everyone.